We're discussing the ingredients for a successful television movie.
Well, it's contrasted to feature pictures,
Yes.
where the director is paramount. Television is a writer's medium, no question about it. And so that just about everything starts with the written word, except that sometimes bringing a piece of talent in conjunction with a conceptual idea, will get a project started. Essentially, to me, it's always chemistry. We've got to put that piece of casting that melds, with the material. It gets more detailed and more difficult than that, and it has gotten so over the years. We'd pick up the phone. Hey, it's a great idea. Boom. Now we'll write a script. Might take a little longer to find a writer that they like, but we could start something on the basis of a meeting. Over the years, it's gotten more and more detailed. You got to give us 7 acts, and we have to see where the act breaks are, and you've got to need 10 or 15 pages, and they have development people who are writing with the writers. It's a very, very difficult, complex situation, much more so than the earlier days. We just didn't have to go through those hoops. But essentially, the trick to taking television movies is being able to recharacterize in the concept and in the material what somebody at a network visualizes that they believe is what's going to work for the demographics and the time period that they're essentially programming for. It's Sunday night's a little more to men. Wednesday night we can use something a little more edgy, and then how many have been made? God, 5,000? I don't know, some unbelievable number. 5, 6, 7. How many times can you? What's the new material? So it's very difficult. And Halmy has he's come across something that no one else is prepared to do. No one else is prepared to take the risks that he takes. He's doing a wonderful thing for television. If you read his conceptual thoughts about reaching the family and bringing, as he said, people know the titles to Animal Farm. They know the title of Alice in Wonderland or Gulliver's Travels, but can they tell you the story today? Probably not. And that's the beauty of what I'm doing. I'm taking well-known titles and I'm disseminating that material and that information, that story, to the viewing audience. And I think is very good. But, is he doing something? Well, I did this much younger than him. I took the Word, an Irving Wallace What If book, went to Europe, shot 90 days across the country. David Jansen never stopped working 6 days a week, sometimes 7. One director, $6 million. That's 20 years ago, well, over 20 years ago. So 6 million's 15 or 20 today. It was an amazing undertaking what we did. But the trick has been, and it's a trick of independent production. And it's the trick of being able to mesh. If you're going to Columbia or you're going to Disney, you're going to pitch a theatrical film, you got to be able to catch the mind of the person who can say yes. And that's the trick of making television movies. Is there a need? Sometimes there's a greater need, and they want something specific that they can tell you about. And crazy things happen. Had a young man working for me, Richard Maynard, came up through Scholastic magazine, very bright, always on top of things. And he was able to convince CBS to do a script on the sinking of the USS Indianapolis. They wrote the script and put it aside. All of a sudden, 2 guys write a book on the USS Indianapolis, and Orion buys the book, pays $500,000 for this book.
You should explain what happened with the USS
I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that because it was just on television. Do you know that?
Yeah.
2020. Yeah. It was just on the other night. Anyway, we call up CBS and say, hey, you got this great script. These guys paid $500,000 for the book. You paid $50,000 for a script. We can make this. Boom. It's done. It happens. U.S. Indianapolis was sunk at the end of World War II, only a week or so before the Japanese surrendered. It was the biggest disaster in the history of the Navy. They lost 900 men. And Captain McVeigh was court-martialed. And he was accused of not following instructions because at those days, and I guess today too, I'm not in the Navy, when you're in potential enemy waters, you're supposed to zigzag. It's supposed to make it more difficult for a submarine to be able to torpedo the ship. For some reason, he didn't do that. He was sunk. His men were lost, some drowned, some burned. Many were eaten by sharks. The wild thing about this is that they brought the Japanese submarine commander to the court-martial to testify against this U.S. captain. You know, of course, the Japanese, being pretty arrogant guys, says, I'd have gotten him whether he zigzagged or not, you know. Well, Navy didn't believe that. They put the marker on McVeigh. Of course, you know, they didn't imprison him or anything, but he had a terrible mark on his record. And 10 years later, he committed suicide. The interesting thing about this is I'm watching the promos for 2020, and I see this thing, sharks, ship. I thought, what is this all about? So I tune in, and there's a young boy, about 12 or 13 years old, who heard about this. He was watching Jaws, the movie. And at the end of Jaws, Robert Shaw and Scheider having a conversation, and they're talking about, because the sharks are out there, they're talking about the sinking of the Indianapolis. And so this little kid decides he's going to write a paper on this subject. And he begins to get more and more into it. And pretty soon he's creating his dossier. His room is filled with all types of memorabilia, and he's been in contact with the survivors. And he's actually gone to, I think they have a bill in Congress now to try to clear Captain McVeigh. Because, as we pointed out in the movie, a lot of, they didn't know where the ship, for 4 days, they didn't know where the ship was. The Navy in Leyte didn't have it. Actually, this ship, the interesting thing about it is the ship that delivered the nuclear bomb to Tiananmen Island. And they were on their way back from having delivered the nuclear bomb. And there were only two submarines, and the captain was not told that the submarines were in the area. There were only two submarines, and one of them got him. But this kid went to Washington, D.C. There's pictures of him with congressmen. It's funny. I didn't even know that. Jack Valenti had a breakfast for Senator McCain, the Vietnam veteran, Navy. And I sent him a tape with a picture. I said, this captain has never been cleared, Senator McCain. You're a Navy man. I think you ought to look into this and see if you can do something about it. Well, I don't know if he ever did, but it's interesting. Here's this young fellow, 13, 14 years old, that's back there trying to cure him. It was interesting. Those kind of pictures are sometimes very interesting and exciting and expensive. Right. Expensive.
Now, you have executive producer credits on many made-for-television movies. What does an executive producer do? I think a lot of people have asked that question.
I wish I knew. Well, producers on television movies are pretty much on the line. Sometimes they're a developer, but they're the guys who have to be out there with the movie. You can't have 3 movies shoot at the same time, be the producer. So as an executive producer, you're primarily a packager. You're a supervisor. You're generally supervising more than one project as a general rule. In the television movie business, series business is a little bit different. But essentially, you're the real entrepreneur on the project. You're usually the individual who's taking the financial risk, if any. You've usually been involved. Many of the pictures I made or had made for my company, the producer never came online until we got to pre-production. I mean, we do all the development in-house. Many times we'd even have a director signed. before we got to we got the producer in. He was our line man. He was out hunting for locations, and from time to time, depending on the nature of the picture, you go. You get out there with it. I mean, I made Rumor of War. I went to Mexico. I had a producer. I had a director. I went to Mexico. I helped pick all locations in Puerto Vallarta. Luckily, I did because I had to come back there. I went to Villahermosa, picked all the locations with the director. Depended on the nature of the project and how deeply you're involved in it, or how much of a risk you're taking, and how difficult the project is. You're out there. We made Martian Chronicles. I was in Malta. But on some pictures, I have to admit, I never got out there because I was basically covering those bases that I felt as an executive had to be covered.
In 1974, I think you realized the dream by starting your own company, Freeze Entertainment, was it?
That was originally... I think we called it it originally was called Alpine Productions.
Alpine?
Yeah, because I was able to take credit at Metromedia, but John Kluge didn't want me to put my name on a picture, so I could put Alpine, which was a street I lived on. And I switched it to Charles Freeze Productions because I remember Quinn Martin. I liked that idea, Quinn Martin. He always good at titles, thinking about executive in charge of studio. I thought, Quinn Martin, that's good, Chuck Freeze. So I called it Charles Freeze Productions. I didn't switch to Freeze Entertainment until later.
Right. Incidentally, didn't you work with Quinn Martin's father at one time in your career?
Yeah, when I started in the business, he was a film editor on a Cisco Kid.
Well, that wasn't his name. Quinn Martin is
no. His father, his name was Cohen. His father's name was Marty Cohen. Martin Cohen. Now, what Quinn's name was, I don't know, because when I met Quinn Martin, he was Quinn Martin. He obviously got the Martin from his father's first name. Maybe his name was Martin Cohen, too, Jr. I don't know. Decided to change it. We worked together for 2 or 3 years. He worked at Ziv, Quinn. Matter of fact, he ran the sound effects department. And he came to me one day and said, I think I have an opportunity to go to Desilu. So if they call, tell them I'm making $500 a week. I said, okay, so that's it.
When you started your own company, did you do it with your own financing, or did you have some outside financing?
I had accumulated some money, and I had this picture that my friend Marty Shapiro, that was earlier. I had another friend, Marvin Moss. What happened is NBC started to make movies with a fellow whose name was Katz. He wasn't the right man. And after 60 days, they didn't have any scripts, and they were going to go on the air in September. So they brought in a fellow by the name of Stanley Robertson, and they put him in the job in May. He started looking for completed scripts, to get pictures made. So my friend Marvin Moss, much like Marty Shapiro, hey, I've got a great script by Lane Slate. NBC wants to do it. I'll put it with you. Let's get it started. So all of a sudden, boom, I had a picture. And that was the beginning of the NBC situation, of getting all those shows on the air. What that did for me was I went to World Vision, who at that time was not financing, but was interested in distributing television movies, and they were prepared to make two things. And one, they made an advance to help me defray my overhead, and then they made an advance against each picture as it was produced and recouped the overhead. So that, with the money I had and a picture to go, I was in business.
Who were you working with at World Vision?
Kevin O'Sullivan was there at the time. That World Vision, when the financial syndication rule came into place, all those network syndication divisions had to be moved out. Kevin O'Sullivan was the head of ABC's syndication division, so he took it over and renamed it World Vision. And the other fellow that was there with him was a fellow named Neil Delman.
John Ryan wasn't there?
No, he came on later, much later.
Now, where was your company located?
They were in New York. They operated.
No, your company.
My company. Oh, well, what happened is that at the end of my tenure at Metromedia, I made a pilot with Ishmael Lee, Fred Coe, kind of a goofy thing about a woman in the Army or something. And Fredco had this great, we used that facility as a rental place for our rental studio to shoot the pilot. Fredco had this great office on the fourth floor at a big bunker over there. So Bob Norvett was a guy I'd known, had done deals with him. I said, I may be leaving Metromedia, so you hold that fourth floor suite of offices for me. He said, yeah, so I moved in there. I joined Metromedia April 7th or something like that, 1970, and April 1974, I moved into CBS Studio Center.
And did you have associates to begin with? Did you work with other people?
Well, what had happened is that Malcolm Stewart, who was an agent that I knew from, at the beginnings of time, had moved into theatrical production. And he made a few pictures, but unsuccessful pictures. And he was kind of like at the end of his rope, And I was looking for somebody to work in development with me at Metromedia, so I said, why don't you come over here, and take a shot. So we did work together for about 6 or 8 months just before I was leaving. And then also, Michael Eisner was, had family, was very friendly with the Gans family. I don't know if you follow art at all, but the Mr. Gans, I don't remember his first name, Tony's father passed away and left the largest Picasso collection in the world. And as a matter of fact, his father was on the design committee for a lot of Disney projects. They were friendly, so Michael called me. He said, I have a really bright young guy just out of college, friend of ours, friend of our family. Name is Tony Gans. I'd like you to see if you can find a place for him. Well, Michael's a buyer, so I'm going to try to figure out how to find a place. Well, it was not a bad recommendation. Tony was very good with the story, very bright. Malcolm was a great pitch artist. So since Metromedia was closing down for the umpteenth time, I said to these guys, come with me. Fine. So I started with, actually my daughter was my secretary because the gal that I had at Metromedia stayed there. Malcolm was development. Tony was our assistant, kind of like story editor. And my daughter was my secretary. And that was it. We started, 4 of us.
What put that company on the map, do you think? What project? Was it the Word?
What it was the ability to deliver. That was the first thing, because Stanley Robertson was running around crazy trying to get movies made for NBC.
Was he black executive?
Yeah, he was
I only mention that because he was one of the first black executives.
One of the few. I mean, that's ever been a network executive. Yeah. And so I had these projects, that some of them that came to me through the Metromedia closeout, which he liked. And I think he even called me and said, hey, take this, because I was delivering. As soon as he gave me an order, boom, I had the picture for him. We had a project, title was The Only Way Is Down, which was much like Irwin Allen's Towering Inferno. The story of people that are trapped on the top of a building, and it starts on fire. So we shot this 90-minute movie, and Stanley said, this thing terrific. My God, it's unbelievable. Let's make 2 hours out of it. So we rushed out. We shot a whole bunch of additional fire material and bought some stock. We stretched it, another, whatever it was, 20 minutes. And one of the airs a 2-hour, got a great rating. And so we were delivering, so the word was out. Hey, these guys, you give them a deal, they can deliver. And, of course, I'd had the reputation from Metromedia, so there was that security involved. But I think, taking up from where your comment, I think that the ability to go out and deliver 8 hours with David Jansen, $6 million, shooting across, the world for that matter. I think it was 1975, 76, something like that. I think that was another step up for us, because we're just an independent company here. I mean, we weren't some major with assets and studios and all. We're just an independent company, and I think that was important. I think that was
You
important.
became friends with David Jansen, did you?
Yeah, he was a good guy. Well, it started. My wife Ava actually lived across the cul-de-sac. I didn't start there, but that helped with the relationship. But David was represented by Abby Gressler, and Abner Gressler was an old-time agent. He was the kind of agent that still came to your office. Agents went to come to their office now. And at Metromedia, I had to make an Ice Capade special every year because John Kluge owned the Ice Capades. It was a natural thing, got sold, had to be made. Metromedia Producers Company had to make it. So we needed someone to be the MC. And that's not an easy job to get somebody to MC an ice show, So Abby comes by the office one day and said, "You got anybody who can do the ice show?" David Chance will do the ice show. I said, "Can he ice skate?" "Sure, he can ice skate. Don't worry about the thing. Everything's perfect." So I signed the deal. I don't know what we gave him. And the next thing you know, I get a call from Abby. "You guys own these ice chalets or something, don't you?" He said, couldn't David go out there and take a few lessons? So I said, "Sure." Well, it turned out he never ice skated in his life. Actually, all he had to do was skate about 30 feet, from the side of the rink to a microphone, and that was about it. But it kind of started a relationship of having lunch and so forth. And as I said, Abby always called. When we got to the word, it was that dead project. And I was at lunch with Abby and David. They said, take a look at this. It's a great central character role. You should consider it. And he said, "I'll do it." So called CBS, Bud Grant. He said, "Have you got David Jansen? You got a deal." Boom, everything came back together.
Professional. David Jansen, a professional actor, a hard-working actor?
Yeah, very professional. David, at 5:30, that was, son came in with a yard arm. He had to have a little knock, but he was always professional. He maybe got a little schnockered at the end of the day. Usually brought along his own driver, his own RV, and the whole bar setup. But he did his job. He was an Iron Man. Think about it. 90 days across Europe, shooting 6 days a week. It was a Herculean task for a man. And he did it. No complaints.
Was he haunted by the fugitive?
No.
Could he...
No, I don't think it was that kind of problem for him. But he had to have it. It wasn't like, when Larry Hagman was having his drinking bouts, he'd come with a big 30-gallon garbage can full of ice and bottles of champagne. And he'd start, in the morning, sipping away. David wasn't that way. David controlled himself until the end of the day, and then he had his knocks. Had a few knocks. He'd get a little knocked, but he never interfered with his work.
I know you're not a doctor, but do you think that had something to do with his early demise? His very premature death?
I don't know. He smoked a lot. I don't remember what he died from, but I know
heart
he
attack.
smoked. He smoked like a smokehouse. He never stopped smoking.
Right.
But the reason I talk about him is he was a regular guy. You go to, he'd walk in in a restaurant. He wouldn't have to have a private room or anything, He'd walk in, people say, "Hi, David." He'd stop and talk. He was a real regular guy. He didn't try to hide from anyone,
You worked on The Word with Dick Berg. Tell us about Dick Berg.
No, I think Dick Berg is extremely bright, and he's he started as a writer on the East Coast. He wrote for quite a few of the Golden Age shows, and he never stopped being a frustrated writer, even when he became a producer. But he was a passionate salesman. Passionate. And he had a good handle on, oddly enough, although the Morris office represented him and they put some projects to him, he would find some of these little old off-the-wall agents who would dig up projects, and scripts. And all of a sudden something great would happen, There would be this piece of material, and it would come from, somebody who worked for Swanee, H.N. Henry Swanson, or somebody like that. But he was always very passionate. And, we put him into some projects. I mean, Rumor of War was a project that we put together, and he was an executive producer. Martian Chronicles is a project we put together. He was an executive producer. But Dick has been successfully selling and putting shows on the air for as long as I can remember. I met him for the first time before I went to Metromedia. He came to me at Columbia to pitch a project. But, his whole family has been, Jeff is his son. A. Scott, who did Perkins and, the recent Lindbergh novel, his son. So the son is a...
was Gertrude Berg his...
I don't know the answer to that. But Dick, he had a crazy... He never stayed at the office after 4 o'clock. But he'd go home, he'd write, and he'd work. But he loved to rewrite people, never told them. Because as a writer, he had a very hard time in trying to direct other writers. So he would find it easier to rewrite the project than to tell them what to do. And, one time he rewrote a project. We submitted it to CBS. We took the writer to the meeting. The guy starts commenting on a script, and the writer's sitting there looking like this. What's going on? I never wrote this. I never wrote that. So at the meeting, Dick says, well, I had to make a few changes. I didn't know if I could tell you. But, when we had, the word was originally written as 12 hours. Had to go to 8. Dick squirreled himself away in the office for 2 weeks, and he cut all those scripts down and pulled them together and made 8 1-hours out of it. And the writers were furious because they all wanted to do it. But I can't blame him. It had to be the easier way. If he felt he was capable of doing it, it had to be the easiest way to do it, because we had like 3 or 4 different writers on those 12 scripts, trying to get those guys to agree. Forget it.
Now, you mentioned A Rumor of War. Is that the project you did in Mexico?
Yeah.
No, but that was the famous or well-received novel by Philip Caputo about Vietnam. Mm-hmm. How did you get to do that in Mexico?
First of all, it's a crazy thing. Stanley Kramer was down the hall. Malcolm's used to like to go down there because, Tim Stanley was a star, and they used to play generally. So one day Malcolm says, where you going, Stanley? Hey, I got this book. Morris office gave it to me. I don't want to do anything. See what you can do with it. So he throws over this book, Philip Caputo. We look at it. It hadn't been much done on Vietnam on television. It looked kind of like a natural, So we took it to CBS. They said they wanted to do it. Now Mark Hell used to be a producer for me as a development guy who worked on the Word. He says, why don't you put Berg with this? You like Dick. So we put Dick on it, and we developed a script with a guy who, in trade papers, who just made a big deal, John Sackett Young, who did China Beach. And he was assigned as the writer. He wrote 4 hours.
I have to ask you to pause here, if you would, please. You were telling us about Rumor of War and how you wound up doing that in Mexico.
Mm-hmm. Well, we had to get something that was going to give us a Vietnamese, that type of background and location. We needed the water. If you look at those vistas and you see the water and the rice paddies and that type of thing. And we needed that type of background, and we really didn't have it here. And so I was a fellow named Bob Scotus, who was a kind of a Mexican fixer. He knew how to do that. And then there was a production manager, Leon Chuluk, who you may remember. He did Tarzan in Mexico, and he was knowledgeable. And they made me a lot of promises, I have to say. They made me a lot of promises. Scotus said, we got the Army, we're going to get cooperation, you're going to get equipment, you're going to get uniforms, you're going to, whatever you need, you're going to have it. The Mexican government's going to go way out, So I went down and I visited the Puerto Vallarta area, and it was great. Had found a lot of good locations. It's a vacation, and it's very expensive. And so someone told SCOTUS about Villahermosa, which at that time was just really like coming to life, because if you remember, at that time, Mexicans discovered oil, and Pemex was in that area. And so there was activity. So we flew down there, and that was gorgeous. The vistas, just had everything we needed. So we started the show in Mexico City. Unfortunately, the Mexicans delivered nothing. The Army delivered nothing. We found the old Jeep that we could drive that only would go in second gear. That's all we had. We started the trucks rolling with, with the guns, with the blanks, with the shot, with all that kind of stuff. They wouldn't let us go across the border. They thought we were trying to, build an army or something. Washington, D.C., we're back and forth. Finally, they released the truck. We're already shooting. We have guys walking around with empty holsters. We make some wooden sticks for guns. I mean, we don't have a gun. If you watch this movie, you see everything around the barracks now. There's no guns. And we got this one lousy Jeep. So they didn't deliver. Anyway, I know it's shooting maybe, whatever it is, 4 or 5 weeks. I get a call, 3 o'clock in the morning, Sunday morning. You got to come down. What do you mean I got to come down? You've got to come. What happened? Well, big fight in the disco, and they destroyed the disco, and 8 of our people in jail, and on and on and on. We had 8 people from Camp Pendleton down there. We had a gunnery sergeant, and he had 6 other Marines. And what we do is we dress all these Mexicans up in Marine uniforms, and for as far as the Vietnamese, they always had the hats and the robes. So the Mexicans were playing Vietnamese. And I get on a plane. I have to fly through Mexico City. I finally get there about 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and I start to do my CIA. I talk to the producer. I talk to the director. I talk to the production manager. And, it turns out that this one kid started dating, trying to get a hold of the police chief's son's girlfriend. So they get into a battle in a disco. The gunnery sergeant's got 8 beer bottle scars on his head. They break the place up. It cost me $15,000 to redo the disco, all new furniture. The guys, I wasn't there. That Saturday night, they all come back. The Mexicans with machetes and pistols, they surround El Presidente. Our guys are in there shivering in their boots, wishing they were in jail in a hotel. So I have a big meeting. I bring the department heads together, and I tell these boys, I said, look, you're in a strange country. You got to conduct yourself properly. You can't just do the kind of things you're doing. You don't take the police chief's son's girlfriend. And I said, I'll tell you what. Look, we only have 1 more week here. I'm the good colonel. I'm going to stay with you. I'm right here at the battlefield, and we won't leave here until we're finished. And some makeup man stands up and said, I'm going home tomorrow. So what do you mean? He's already got an insurrection. He said, well, Tuesday is whatever, Independence Day, and they're all going to be off of work, and they're going to get loaded on tequila, and I'll be down here again with pistols and machetes. So the next morning, 90 tickets back to Mexico City. Luckily, unluckily, but luckily, we had some negative damage, so we got to Churubusco Studios, and we made a scene. We shot, a couple days. We needed a scene with a prostitute and a whatever, and we had some negative pickup stuff. We did that all while we're shooting there. We're rolling the trucks because there's no freeway in Mexico in those days. Every road is like this, up and down, up and down. It took us from Villahermosa to Puerto Vallarta, it's about 700 miles. I don't think we traveled more than 100 miles. And maybe it took them 5 days. So the director and I flew ahead because we'd picked these locations, so we knew how we could match stuff. We'd put all the huts and everything on a truck. I don't know what it cost me, maybe 150 grand. And we get up there. We get to Puerto Vallarta. We make a deal with the Posada Vallarta. I go out there on Saturday. Here's all the crew. They're out there having a great time drinking margaritas. They're all in a swimming pool. They're dancing and carrying on with all the local girls. Same thing all over again, right? So I go back home, and then I get a call. Hey, we're not making any headway. We're not going anywhere. I come down. I got a kidney stone attack. Now I start going to all these Mexican doctors. By the time I get finished, I got a bag full of medicine this big. Finally, I said, I got to go home. I get on a plane. I sit down. Kidney stone pops. That's a side issue. I finally pulled him out. I couldn't last any longer because I was running out of money. I finally pulled him out, and, I just figured out. I said, we're going to shoot the rest of this thing in Los Angeles where I can see and watch what's going on, And we're going to start cutting some pages and changing, which we eventually did. But the guy who saved my life is the guy named John Daly who ran Hemdale. He loved this, and he paid me $1.5 million for the foreign theatrical rights. And we recut a version for him, and that covered all of my overages, and made me a profit.
Actually, it was well received.
Yeah, oh, yeah. Yeah, it was an excellent piece of work. I'm telling you, when Platoon got its awards, there was a New York Times editorial, which a friend of mine cut out, and said that if you think Platoon was good, you should see the miniseries Rumor of War, because it's more authentic. It's a better piece of film. It was good. Brad Davis drove me crazy. You know,
he was starring in it.
Yeah, and he was an addict. I mean, got down
a drug addict?
Booze and pills. I mean, I arrived and we had a dinner for the cast, and the guy orders 3 scoops of chocolate ice cream, and he pours a half a bottle of Grand Marnier on top of it. You know, my wife looks at me and says, "I think you got trouble." At that point forward, went downhill. The medicine cabinet was always full of prescription drugs, and it was terrible, terrible. We lost time with him, but you know something? It's interesting. This is an interesting piece of textbook material. Cast insurance won't cover. They won't cover it because they say that alcoholism, drug addiction is not a disease and it's not an illness, and they won't cover it because they have so many people who are into that if they started covering it, they'd go broke. So they fought us tooth and nail. We never. I had a big claim for a lot of different things, but I only collected about half of it because they wouldn't pay.
But Davis got through the role.
Oh, yeah, he got through the role. Denied that he ever had a problem. And then a year or two later, he went to AA and said, "I'm an alcoholic. I admit it. I'm an addict." Then a year later, died of AIDS.
Right. That brings us to the Martian Chronicles.
Oh, that was easy compared with the Martian Chronicles.
We're in 1980 now.
78. 78, yeah. Well, you know, Malcolm had represented Ray Bradbury as an agent in the 60s. And every so often we'd try to sell the Martian Chronicles. Why we tried to sell it, I do not know. Because after we sold it, we should have never sold it. I mean, it was the most unbelievable project to try to take on. It was just ridiculous. We're sitting in Deanne Barkley's office at NBC.
Please tell us who Deanne Barkley.
Deanne Barkley was in charge of development at that time of movies and miniseries.
Again, one of the first women to be in that kind of a job.
Right. She had started at AC, and they were buying like crazy. I mean, just about that time, I think it was that day, there was a trade paper release on Star Wars. It had been on through the roof. Well, you know what would do science fiction until Star Wars came along. For years, they wouldn't touch it. So he said, "Look at this." She said, "You're right. You get Richard Matheson, we'll do a 6-hour miniseries." Well, Richard Matheson wasn't that difficult to get.
Tell us who Richard Matheson.
Richard Matheson, you know, was a top writer, did a lot of great work. I don't have his resume.
But he was a science fiction writer.
Yeah, but a top writer who normally wouldn't do television. Okay. But he jumped, you know, on this thing because he loved the project. But, you know, 20 different people had owned it. When we did the chain of, first of all the stories in Martian Chronicles were written for science fiction magazines, individual stories, and Ray put them together in this one book. So the chain of title was unbelievable. They went all the way back to Argosy, all different kinds of, I mean, in the 30s and 40s when he wrote this stuff, as a young man, we had everybody owned it. David Wolper, you name it. Everybody optioned it, and no one could get it made. And so, boom, we have it. And from that point forward, it was really tough because NBC wouldn't pay the whole license fee. I sat in Europe for 2 weeks trying to generate. In those days, to generate $1 million was like unbelievable.
What was the license fee for this?
They, I think they paid me $4 million, and I had to guarantee that I would spend $4,750,000. That turned out to be real easy. But I had to have the financing for $4,750,000. Frankly, I didn't have that. So I went to Europe. I found the BBC, and they were doing a few co-production deals. And I was knowledgeable because having been with Columbia, I knew a lot of people in the UK. So he put up $600,000, and then he brought in the German Polygram. So long as we think we put Maria Schell as a German actress into the picture, into the series, and they put up another $250,000. So as far as NBC was concerned, they were happy. You know, so we picked the island of Malta because it's treeless. It had a big tank. shoot across the horizon. We built the sets in the tank. You know, it was working like gangbusters. The only problem was, being a treeless, you had to bring all the lumber in. And we had to bring everything in. And I finally sent my son over there because I said, you know, Butch, we may lose the house on Alpine and the whole enchilada on this may be the end of the line. So he was a young guy. He'd had experience, you know. I put him out on sets and stuff. And he got over there and he said, Dad, you don't stop those guys from shipping in lumber containers, we are going to go down a tube. So we took this set, and we all of a sudden, boom, we changed everything that we could to still make it acceptable. And it looks really good on film. But we cut that sucker in half, and we made a lot of changes. But in the final analysis, you know, we knocked it out. But I was in the tank over the 750, maybe $1.5 million, $2 million. But I had a savior. There's always a savior out there for Charlie. I guess I pray. I don't know. It was an old distributor, Red Silverstein. Red had worked for MGM for years. He was an independent distributor. And I convinced him that we could cut a great theatrical film out of this, and he went out and sold it about $2 million of theatrical sales on this thing. And, well, we cut it. We shipped it. Everybody didn't pay. Most people paid. And we eventually, you know, bailed. I tried to get NBC to help me. They wouldn't help.
No, wait a minute.
But it took years.
It went theatrical after its television?
Yeah, it went theatrical form.
Right. Now, was it a benefit to have Rock Hudson in as the star?
That helped. But you see, when we finally cut the feature together, I have to tell you quite honestly, it was not a strong picture. It wasn't a strong picture. It just didn't work. But as a miniseries, it was brilliant. And Fred Silverman, who had moved to NBC, saw the miniseries, and he was going to put it on in September to start the season. It was going to be the first thing. And NBC had one of these television critics meetings or something. And so they decided to invite Ray Bradbury. He was going to be their star, not Chuck Fries, not Rock Hudson, Ray Bradbury, the famous science fiction writer. We had one problem, one difference with him. In the book, there's a guy left on Mars, and he doesn't believe there's anybody else. So he goes to the phone book, and he starts calling. He calls number after number after number.
In space.
In space. He finally, well, this is, you know, Ray Bradbury's space. He finally hears a voice, and it's a woman's voice, and it sounds fantastic. And where are you? And she tells him, and he gets in his Martian car, and he starts driving miles and miles and miles to reach her. Now, in Ray's version, when he reaches her, she turns out to be some hag with curlers in her hair and a real mess. So Dick Berg said, wait a minute. You know, that doesn't sound good. Let's make it a beautiful woman. The guy's driven all these miles. So we hire Bernadette Peters, right? This is a lovely young lady. Ray saw this. He went crazy. He flipped. You got to reshoot this. I said, look, man, you know, we're in the dumper right now with this, and NBC's not going to put up any money. I can't. And frankly, we think it's pretty good, and it's about the only change we made. Well, you know, at the Critics Award, he stands up. At the Critics meetings, he stands up and he says, these people destroyed his own project. These people destroyed my material. Did that? And he starts, you know, whatever else he said, I don't know. Boom. Show's off the air. They don't put it on until January. It's still got a great rating. But the guy could have had a real smashing success. But because of some stupid little change that we made.
Didn't you lose the irony of the story? The irony of the story is he travels all this distance.
Oh, we didn't feel that way. We thought we improved it. We improved it, frankly.
How did Rock Hudson come to be cast? I mean, he's a movie star.
Yeah, well, you know, he was ready. He wanted to work, and they did television. Did McMillan and White?
Oh, that's true.
Yeah, he was across the line.
Did you meet him somewhere?
Well, yeah, I did. But you know, he was a good guy. I mean, it's just a crazy thing. I was at the Mauna Kea hotel, and I hear these voices, and I look down from my room to the veranda, and there's Rock down there with some guy. They spent the whole week there together. Kind of destroyed my vision of him. I always thought it was Rock Hudson. Turned out to be something else. And actually, you know, my PR guy, Dale Olson, who worked for me for a long time, was the man who eventually went over. Remember when Rock Hudson, he leased a 747. He had AIDS. He went over to France to try to save himself. He leased a 747 to fly him back. And Dale Olson, the PR guy, was the man who went over there and came back with him.
Yeah,
he was good. You know, he was a good man, though. I mean, Rock Hudson was a strong performer. He was a hard worker. He never caused an ounce of trouble. Never. Showed up on time, did whatever he had to do.
So you met him in Hawaii?
Yeah, I met him there. And then, of course, I met him when we signed him, and I went over to Malta. I spent some time over there.
And Martian Chronicles wound up being profitable for you in the long run?
Well, in the long run, basically because of the home video. But you see, it's a school book. It's a textbook project. Every kid in school is reading Martian Chronicles, and you've got a jillion sci-fi buffs, and they sell it at Columbia House. I mean, it never stops selling. Continuously. But it took a long time to bail, that's for sure. I mean, it was just too tough. I mean, it was too much money. You calculate the interest, it would have taken forever.
With television movies like series, are you victimized by the ratings system very often? Are you under the tyranny of the ratings?
Yeah, to a certain extent, absolutely. But you know, producers are impacted to some extent, certainly, because in a series, especially where your ratings start going down, it's over. Television movies, it's really the guy who programs the show that wakes up the next morning and reads the ratings and says, "Oh my God." Right. The producer does that too, but unless it was since the network has so much control on so many of these things as far as the final approvals on cast and that, they have to take almost as much or more of the responsibility for the rating than the producer. So if you give them a quality product, you're not going to be as impacted as much by ratings on television movies as you will on series.
It's like reviewing a concert after the concert. What difference does it make? The movie already played. What difference does the rating make?
That's, well, you know, only to the extent that that's their bread and butter, you know. Ratings, you know that more. You've been around. Ratings equate into dollars. It's that simple.
But your production is already played, so it only impacts on your future reputation.
Well, I say, but if you deliver a good movie, quite often that doesn't even impact on your reputation because, you know, you can deliver a fine movie that doesn't get ratings. Right. I mean, it could be the competition. I mean, John Mitchell, I will go back to him. John always used to say, "You guys can produce good product, but it takes the time slot. I get the time slots for you producers. When I get that time slot, I'm putting you in a position." But, you know, that's true. The old basket concept, put it after Home Improvement, put it after Frasier, you know, put it after Seinfeld, and it's going to get a good rating going in. But you could have a great movie, and they can put Gone with the Wind up against you, and boom, you're in the dumper. Right. That's it.
Now, television series has not been your focus throughout your career.
Not once I got out. No. I tell you, it's, as we said before, you know, Harry Ackerman was great for comedy. Somebody else is great for drama. Bochco does one thing, Carsey Werner does another. After a period of time, you know, you become a television movie guy, and they don't really look to you for series. I did a few series, and I made some money on them, but it never played like the television movies did.
Was there one series that sticks in your mind?
Yeah, I did Spider-Man. I only made 15 episodes. I made a fortune, you know. I did Super Carrier, which was 6 episodes. I made a lot of money because I took Super Carrier 6 hours and I made it into 3 2-hour movies. Second movie, the voice goes across to see the carrier going across. He says, "And now we're entering, you know, the Mediterranean. We're going to be going to Malta." And now we're in the next episode. They did the same thing with Spider-Man.
You also made a lot of pilots that didn't sell as well.
Yeah, not too many, but enough that I don't want to remember them.
So you're also suggesting that you get pigeonholed very much.
I think that's true. Yeah. Don't you? I mean, I mean, they're not hiring Joel Silver to do Big Daddy in the theatrical business. And they're not hiring Marcy Carsey to do The Profiler or The Predator or Law and Order. I mean, and they're not hiring Dick Wolf, although he may try to sell himself or something. And not hiring Steve Bochco. I mean, it really, you do get classified. You do get categorized, I think. And it's a nature of the business. It's very difficult to break those things, you know.
But if you get big enough, like a Bill Murray wanting to do the Razor's Edge, much to his distress.
But you know, oft times when these guys go against the grain, they end up in the dumper, you know.
Right.
You know, Jim Carrey kind of pulled it off with Truman. You know, he kind of still was a comedy, but I mean, usually it doesn't work.
Let me ask you about one other of your productions, For Us the Living, that you did for PBS.
Well, there was a young man, Ken Ropcott, who had gone to Medgar Evers' wife. Murley had written a book about Medgar, and Ropcott was getting nowhere with it. And I think he finally spec'd the script himself or something. And he came to me and said, "You think we can set this up?" So we took it to CBS, and they ordered a rewrite, and we got a script, but a dumper. They didn't. I mean, who wants to do, you know, assassination of a black civil rights leader? Didn't. I mean, somebody wanted to, but somebody else didn't want to. And I have to give Ken a lot of credit for this because, frankly, at the time that it happened, I was not that well. And Ken did something I have to tell you I would have never thought of. He went to Washington, he got the NEA and the NEH to put up $500,000 apiece for $1 million to make this. Now, believe me, it was a labor of love for us to do it because there was not any money in it. But people like Michael Schultz, who was a great director, worked for Scale. Howard Rollins, Ruby Dee, they all worked, you know, for Zippo. And we ended up doing a picture in Atlanta, Georgia, non-union, for just about $1 million, maybe a little more. Unfortunately, at the time, I ended up with a bypass. I had coronary problems, and I was pretty much out of the loop. So I can't take a lot of personal credit. I can only take credit for being passionate about it because Medgar Evers was a brave man. You know, Martin Luther King marched with a lot of people. Jesse Jackson marched with a lot of people. But Medgar Evers walked down the streets of Jackson, Mississippi by himself. He walked down there with the rednecks where they throw the grenades. And he got blown away. And of course, you know, just recently Rob Reiner tried to make a movie. You know, De Beckwith was brought to trial, and Rob tried to make a picture with Murley about it, but it failed. But I just believe that, you know, I don't think I'd be brave enough to do what Medgar Evers did, and that's why I wanted to do everything I could to see that it got made. It won an Image Award from the AACP.
Did it wind up on PBS because the commercial networks?
PBS, yes. It went to PBS. And then, of course, we sold it in syndication and went to 4 and that type of thing. But it never made any money. I mean, you know.
Had you ever done anything with PBS previously?
No.
Is there a big difference working with PBS? Must be.
Oh, yeah. You know, I don't know. Marion Reese right now, you know, has made a 3-picture deal. And she claims to be getting $3 million. I don't know where she's getting it from, but she says she's getting $3 million a movie. But, you know, in those, I've always tried to play, I mean, quite honestly, because you have an overhead and you have a business, you know, you have to be selective. You can't do projects that are marginal projects, if at all possible. You just have to do that selectively. You know, this picture, Selma, Lord Selma, that just won the Humanities, is a picture we developed a long time ago, and we lost the rights to it. And Julian Fowles, who worked for me, decided to take it to Moctezuma Esparza, and they just won a Humanities Award. It was, again, a marginal picture. We know that, you know, pictures with black leads don't necessarily sell well, you know, in Europe. It just doesn't work. And so it's something that you do because you love the idea and you want to see it made. And that's basically what it was all about. But for us, I think Ken Ropcott did a Herculean task in helping it get made, and we took the risk, and you know, put a lot of resources behind it ourselves to get it made.
Yeah. In 1984, you went public with Freeze Entertainment. Was that like grabbing a tiger by the tail?
Yeah.
You're making a face.
No.
That was not a good decision?
I don't think so. It sounded great. It got me into areas that I always thought I should go into, but I was, I was having a great time because I didn't have a lot of other things to worry about. When we were making pictures, just making pictures, and somebody else was distributing them, and that was my business. And when you start distributing yourself, you get department heads, you start having status meetings, you go through all this garbage, and you get further removed, from the product. And factually, we started to make less pictures because of that. I believe that my vision got skewed out into a lot of areas that I probably shouldn't have been in the first place. I should have left to other people. And, I that's what I did best, and that's what I enjoy doing. That's what I do today. I'm still out pitching projects, still got that script under my arm, still pedaling and enjoying it.
And I hope you'll enjoy a little pause now before we go on to what will be one of our last tapes.
Yeah, let's finish.